My name is Rita Wright, 31 years old. The gavel's crack ricochets through the probate courtroom like a small explosion, and I feel it in my ribs before I hear the words. Motion granted. The court will allow Mr. Wright additional time to review the medical records. Fifth delay in 8 months. The air conditioning gnaws at my damp collarbone. Sweat beads at my hairline anyway. I keep my hands flat on the table so no one sees them tremble, then curl my fingers around the edge until my knuckles whiten. Across from me, my father leans toward his attorney, a murmured aside that makes both of them smirk. Leonard Wright, master of optics. He looks like a magazine ad for success. Tailored charcoal suit, gold cufflinks I remember polishing for him as a kid, confidence poured into posture until the room folds around it. Your Honor, he says in that velvety baritone that won juries and investors and lovers, we request additional time to review Mrs. Foster's medical records. There are inconsistencies that may impact distribution of assets. Assets. He turns my mother's life into a ledger entry without even flinching. $85,000 in savings. A modest 2-bedroom townhouse in Tacoma where she rebuilt after the divorce. An antique oak chest carved with roses passed down through her family. All the tangible residue of Elena Foster, who once tucked a stray hair behind my ear while whispering to be brave, reduced to columns my father intends to conquer. Clara Ruiz, my attorney, and the only person in this room who sees me as more than a problem to be managed, stands. This is the 5th such request, Your Honor. We've already provided complete medical records twice. Ms. Wright's mother was of sound mind. Judge Alcott tips his head, eyes already moving to the next paper on his docket. His face is a study in polite disinterest, the kind that makes you feel small without any overt effort. Duly noted, he says, and my stomach drops because I know how that tone ends. It ends the way it always ends, with the gavel, the continuance, the administrative shrug that says the system is neutral while it quietly picks a side. Don't let him see you, Clara whispers without looking at me. He wants the reaction. I try to swallow the heat crawling up my throat. The courtroom's fluorescent lights buzz like trapped flies. Somewhere behind me, a pen scratches paper, relentless. I close my eyes and I'm 15 again, standing in a kitchen that smells like burnt coffee, listening to Mom whisper that Dad won't be coming home. Vanessa from his office has an apartment by the lake. At the table, my father's tie glints where he dropped it like a forgotten serpent. Court is adjourned until November 12th, the judge says, and the bailiff's voice calls. All rise, chairs scrape, bodies move. My father glances back as if remembering I exist, as if to confirm that I'm still the manageable daughter he designed. I give him nothing but the side of my face. In the parking garage, concrete amplifies footsteps and regret. Clara walks beside me, phone in hand, brisk as an ER doctor. This isn't normal, she says. These rulings, he's not just cautious, he's bending protocol. Because of Dad? My voice comes out flatter than I expect. I'm making calls, she says. Colleagues who practiced before him say he doesn't usually do this. Something's off here. We reach my aging Honda. The driver's door creaks in protest when I open it. Everything in my life creaks lately. Time, money, patience. You okay to drive? Clara asks. I'm okay to not scream, I say. That feels like a win. Her mouth twitches. Document today, every deviation, timestamp, phrase. If we have to appeal, appeals cost money. I stare at the cracked steering wheel. Public defender salary, student loans, rent barely covered, emergency savings limping along. He knows I can't bleed forever. Clara's hand lands briefly on my forearm. He's counting on you to quit. Don't give him what he's buying. I nod. She leaves. I exhale, long and shaky, the kind of breath you take before pulling a splinter. My phone vibrates in my pocket. Unknown number. Virginia area code. Spam, probably. I almost swipe it away, then answer on instinct. Is this Rita Wright? A woman's voice, steady, as if she's already decided I'll trust her. It is. Who's calling? My name is Renee Barrett. I worked with your mother years ago. The name is unfamiliar. The tone isn't. It carries a specific gravity, like court reporters and ICU nurses. Worked with her where? In the Air Force, she says. And for a second, all I hear is the garage's hum. My mother's Air Force years were a sepia fragment. Office work, she'd say. Then redirect to library anecdotes and budget recipes, a quiet dignity that never drifted into detail. My mother did admin, I say. She did signals intelligence, the woman says gently. She was very good. There are things from that time your father would rather you never see. Based on today's hearing, I'd guess you're already feeling that. I grip the phone harder. How did you? I have old contacts, your case pinged in a corner of a corner. I can hear her walking. Stairwell echo, rubber soles on concrete. There's a phrase you'll need to know. Winter lantern. Don't say it to anyone yet, only when it matters. A chill slides along my spine. What do you want from me? To meet tomorrow, somewhere quiet. A pause. Not over the phone. Who are you to my mother? Someone who owes her, she says. Noon. I'll text an address. Come alone. The line clicks dead. I stare at my reflection in the dark phone screen, eyes too bright, mouth too tight. For a reckless second, I consider calling my father and seeing what winter lantern does to his pulse. Instead, I put the phone down like it's evidence. At my apartment, I open a fresh legal pad and write everything I can remember from court. Phrases, micro-reactions, the exact moment Judge Alcott avoided Clara's eyes. Then I write, Renee Barrett, Air Force, Signals Intelligence, Winter Lantern, and circle it 3 times. I cook pasta I can't taste. I try to watch a show I can't follow. When sleep finally drags me under, it brings a dream of my mother at the Tacoma townhouse window, sunlight catching dust motes like slow, suspended snow. She mouths 3 words I can't hear. When I wake, I know she said, "Look beneath roses." Morning is a gray lid over Seattle. I drive to work on autopilot, traffic lights blinking their indifference. At the public defender's office, Liam, my supervisor, appears at my cubicle with that careful, managerial concern that feels like a summons. Rita, he says, you've missed 3 prelims this month. I covered all filings, I say. Rachel took one with my notes. I know you're dealing with family matters, he says, eyes flicking to the probate folder, peeking out from under case files. But our clients don't have margin. They need you in the room. I'm in the room, I say, and it sounds defensive because it is. He leaves me with an expression that lands somewhere between worry and arithmetic. I finish a motion, triage another. At 11:35 a.m., I close my laptop and tell myself I'm going to lunch like a normal person. The cafe address Renee texts looks like a place that prefers whispering, worn wood, quiet corners, the kind of barista who remembers your order and your secrets. I arrive early and choose a table facing the door. Renee arrives exactly at noon, mid-50s, hair streaked silver in a deliberate bun, posture that says military before you see the shoes. She doesn't scan the room. She walks straight to me. Rita, she says, offering her hand like a contract. Her grip is warm, precise, unyielding. You knew my mother, I say, and it comes out as need more than question. I did, she says. She waits until the server leaves our coffees before continuing. Your mother wasn't office staff. She read patterns, codes. She served on a program most people never heard of, Blue Harbor. The name lands like a small, hard object in the middle of our table. The cafe's soundtrack fades to a thin thread. Your father and Richard Alcott were young legal advisors attached to that project, she says. They learned where the lines lived and how to pretend they hadn't crossed them. My heart hammers in my ears the way it did when the gavel fell. I think of Judge Alcott's polite nod, my father's immaculate cuffs. You're saying they used classified work? For leverage, she says, not unkindly. Your mother documented what she could. She kept it where no one thought to look. If the probate case feels rigged, that isn't your imagination. I stare at the wood grain until it stops swimming. Why tell me now? Because he's hunting the chest, she says softly. Not for its monetary value, for what might be inside. She leans in. When the moment comes, speak the phrase, Winter Lantern, and remember the roses. She slides a small notebook across the table. Don't open it here, she says. You'll know when. Outside, the city keeps pulsing, unbothered by the fact that my map of the world has just been redrawn. I tuck the notebook into my bag, along with a new version of my mother and of myself. The woman who shelved books part-time was also a strategist who understood that some wars are won before they're fought, by someone who planned for you to find the truth when you were strong enough to carry it. I step into the gray afternoon, the taste of coffee and adrenaline in my mouth, and I feel something I haven't since all this began, purpose, clean and sharp. Tomorrow I'll stand in my mother's old townhouse, run my fingers over the carved roses on that oak chest, and listen for a click I never thought to hear. Tonight I'll go home and lay everything out like exhibits: the judge's tilting head, my father's smirk, the phrase bright as a fuse. Winter lantern. Let them smirk. I'm done being managed. My mother used to say that truth hides in plain sight. It just waits for the moment you finally have the courage to look at it. That sentence kept echoing through my head the next morning as I drove to Tacoma. The air smelled like sea salt and wet asphalt, the kind of November morning that leaves the whole city gray and half asleep. I hadn't been to my mother's townhouse since the funeral. The paint on the porch rail had chipped more, and the mailbox still carried her name, Elena Foster, in fading black letters. When I unlocked the door, the same faint scent of lavender and old books hit me. Everything was still. The curtains were half drawn, as if the house itself was keeping secrets. The living room looked untouched, except for the small wooden chest near the window, the one with carved roses across its lid. I stood there, coffee cooling in my hand, and tried to hear her voice again. Look beneath the roses. The previous night, after meeting Renee, I had barely slept. Her words had burrowed under my skin. My mother, the quiet librarian, an Air Force code analyst, my father and Judge Alcott using government operations for leverage? It sounded like something out of a legal thriller, not the story of the woman who made tomato soup from scratch and cried during Jeopardy reruns. Still, there was a weight in Renee's voice that couldn't be faked. She hadn't been looking for fame or sympathy. She'd looked at me like someone who was finishing a promise. I set down my bag and knelt beside the chest. The brass latch felt cold. When I opened it, the familiar smell of cedar drifted up, the smell of my childhood. Inside were folded quilts, photo albums, and a small velvet pouch with my grandmother's wedding ring. Nothing unusual. Then, as I brushed my thumb across one of the carved roses, I felt the tiniest give beneath the wood. My breath caught. I pressed harder. A faint click. The panel shifted. My pulse thundered in my ears. The false bottom lifted free, revealing a shallow compartment lined with thin felt. Inside, a leather-bound journal and a stack of black and white photographs waited like sleeping ghosts. I pulled them out one by one. The first photo stopped my breath cold. 2 young men in military uniforms, smiling beside radio towers. One of them was unmistakably my father. The other, Richard Alcott, before the gray hair, before the judge's robes. Their arms were slung over each other's shoulders. Behind them, the words, Blue Harbor Communications Division, were stenciled on a metal sign. The next photo showed a group of officers seated around a table cluttered with documents. My mother sat at the far end, her expression serious, nothing like the gentle half-smile I knew. Her hair was shorter then, military neat. She was surrounded by men twice her age, and yet she looked like the one giving orders. I flipped open the journal. The first page bore her handwriting. Neat, disciplined, each line deliberate. June 12, 1996. Surveillance expanding beyond legal parameters. Gardner's daughter under observation again. Feels wrong. Leonard says, just paperwork. Alcott agrees. They're both ambitious. Too ambitious. My throat went dry. Gardner's daughter. I didn't know who that was, but the tone was unmistakable. My mother documenting something dangerous. The entries continued. Mentions of encrypted transmissions, internal memos, untraceable accounts, then one underlined note. Jamie Winters threatened exposure. Car accident last night, not an accident. My fingers trembled as I turned the page. Beneath the handwriting, a faint coffee ring blurred a date. August 5th, 1996. I sat back on my heels, the journal open on my lap. This was no family diary. This was evidence, the kind of thing people got killed over. I heard myself whisper, Mom, what did you do? The sound of my own voice broke something inside me. I pressed the journal to my chest and let out a shaky laugh, half disbelief, half grief. The woman I'd known had been fighting a silent war I never even noticed. My phone buzzed. Renee's text appeared. If you found it, don't speak names on open line. Meet me at the park. 4 p.m. Bring 1 photo. 4 hours. Enough time to fall apart, then rebuild myself enough to face her. By the time I reached Lincoln Park, the wind off Puget Sound was slicing through my coat. Renee stood near a bench, gloved hands clasped behind her back. She wasn't surprised to see me, or the manila envelope clutched in my hand. You opened it, she said. Not a question. I had to. I handed her one of the photos, the one with my father and Alcott. You knew about this? She studied it quietly. Yes, and she wanted you to have it when you were ready. I stepped closer. Ready for what? To realize my father's a criminal? That my mother lived a double life? Renee's eyes softened. Ready to survive the truth. She nodded toward the water. Elena told me years ago that if anything ever happened to her, the lies would outlive her unless you were strong enough to burn them down. She never stopped protecting you, even when it cost her everything. Protecting me from what? From the men who turned surveillance into profit. She lowered her voice. Blue Harbor wasn't just about foreign threats. They spied on domestic figures, senators, journalists, activists. Your mother found out and started documenting the pattern. Leonard and Alcott used what they learned for political favors and legal leverage. Your father's partnership, Alcott's judicial nomination, none of it was coincidence. My mouth went dry. And Mom kept it all this time? She couldn't go public, Renee said, not without endangering both of you. So she waited. She hoped exposure could come safely, through due process, not chaos. I stared at the photo again, the easy smiles of men who thought no one was watching. The probate case, I said slowly. He's not after the money, he's after this. He's terrified. Exactly, Renee said. And terrified people make mistakes. He already did one by pushing the delays. Too many eyes will start asking why. She reached into her coat pocket and handed me a small metal flash drive, encrypted backup of her files. I can't keep it. If you trust your lawyer, make a duplicate and store it off-site. If you don't, hide it somewhere, even you might forget for a while. I turned it over in my fingers. What's on this? Enough to make men like your father and Alcott lose everything, she said. But don't use it yet. Timing will matter. The wind carried the smell of rain and salt between us. What happens if they find out I have this? I asked. Renee looked at me for a long time, then said quietly, Then you'll understand what kind of courage your mother lived with every day. She walked away before I could ask anything else. Her figure grew smaller against the gray horizon until she disappeared entirely, like a shadow fading at sunset. That night, I couldn't sit still. Every time I closed my eyes, images overlapped. My father's smirk in court, the photo of him in uniform, my mother's steady handwriting describing things she should never have seen. I poured a glass of wine and opened the journal again, reading until the words blurred. Near the back, an entry dated 2 years before her death caught my attention. If this ever reaches Rita, tell her not to be afraid of the truth. The truth is the only thing that can't be destroyed by power. I ran my fingers over the ink, tracing the loops of her letters. Outside, a siren wailed somewhere far off, swallowed by the night. I looked toward the chest, still open by the window, the empty compartment gaping like a wound. My father wanted to bury her again, under paperwork and courtroom language. But my mother had left me something he couldn't manipulate: proof, patience, and a path. The first raindrops hit the glass. I stood, grabbed my coat, and walked out into the storm. The drive to Seattle blurred in streaks of water and light. When I reached Clara's apartment, she answered the door in sweats, blinking at me. Rita, it's 10:30. I found something, I said, holding up the journal. And we're not dealing with probate law anymore. We're dealing with blackmail, corruption, and national security crimes. Her brows knit together. What are you talking about? I stepped inside, water dripping from my coat onto her floor. My father, Judge Alcott, Operation Blue Harbor. My mother documented everything. Clara's face went pale. You're sure? I placed the photo on her table. This is them. She stared at it for a long time. If this is real, then your father's power could collapse everything. Are you ready for that? I thought of Mom's steady voice in those journal pages. Don't be afraid of the truth. Yes, I said. I think that's exactly what she raised me for. Outside, lightning split the clouds, bright and brief, a winter lantern cutting through the dark. The next morning began with a silence so sharp it hurt. No cars yet on the street below. No neighbor's radio leaking through the thin apartment walls. Just the faint hum of my refrigerator and the heavy pulse in my chest. I sat at my kitchen table with my mother's journal, open beside a half-drunk cup of coffee gone cold. Each entry read like a confession, sealed in code, and I was still learning the language. The dates matched the years my father's career soared. The same years my mother stopped smiling in photos. The deeper I read, the clearer it became. Every one of his promotions lined up with a covert operation gone wrong. Blue Harbor wasn't a mission. It was a pipeline for control. September 1996. Gardner's vote secured. Operation reclassified. Leonard rewarded. Alcott promised consideration. October 1996. Jamie Winters' accident report edited. I kept copies. Cannot let this disappear. My mother had written those lines in careful looping strokes. Every letter was proof of how quietly she fought. I ran my fingers down the page, half afraid the ink would smear after all these years. A knock on the door made me flinch so hard I spilled coffee across the notebook. My heart jumped. It was too early for deliveries, too early for anyone. When I looked through the peephole, relief came and went in the same breath. Clara stood in the hallway, hair still damp from her morning shower, holding a folder and 2 coffees. You didn't sleep, she said when I opened the door. Neither did you. I went over Alcott's docket history. There's a pattern. She placed the folder on my table. Every case involving your father's firm, Wright, Patterson, and Delaney, got extensions, dismissals, or rulings in their favor. Some of it's subtle, but it's there. I gestured toward the open journal. This isn't subtle. She scanned a page, eyebrows drawing together. This mentions Gardner's vote. That's Senator Gardner. He chaired the Defense Oversight Committee back then. I nodded slowly. Mom was documenting blackmail. Clara's lips parted, then closed. She was a good attorney, rational, meticulous, but the weight of it was visible even on her. If this is true, she said quietly, you're not just dealing with a corrupt judge and a greedy father. You're dealing with a web that's had decades to build armor. Then we start pulling threads. I said it faster than I felt ready. Clara leaned back in her chair, watching me. There's no undoing this, Rita. Once you move, they'll move faster. I met her gaze. They already have. I'm just catching up. At noon, I walked into my father's law office downtown, every step rehearsed so my fear couldn't show. The building's lobby gleamed like a shrine to arrogance. Marble floors, a waterfall wall feature, and his name embossed in gold behind the reception desk. Wright, Patterson, and Delaney, LLP. The receptionist rose immediately. Ms. Wright, your father doesn't have you scheduled. He'll see me, I said, brushing past before she could object. I knew the office layout by memory, years of childhood visits when I'd waited in the lobby, pretending not to hear him charm or bully whoever sat across from him. Now I walked the same hallway, but this time my steps didn't echo with obedience. He looked up from behind his massive mahogany desk when I entered. The floor-to-ceiling windows behind him framed the Seattle skyline in silver-gray light. Rita, he said smoothly, though the surprise in his eyes betrayed him. You should have called. This won't take long. He sighed, standing. If this is about the hearing. It's not. I took a folded photograph from my bag and slid it across his desk. It's about this. He picked it up casually, but his fingers stiffened halfway through unfolding it. For a fraction of a second, I saw the man behind the performance, color draining, shoulders tightening, mouth flattening into a line. Where did you get this? He asked. The control in his voice was paper-thin. Mom kept records, I said. Photos, journals, dates, Operation Blue Harbor, Senator Gardner, Jamie Winters. He dropped the photo onto the desk as though it burned. You have no idea what you're saying. Then enlighten me. He took a slow breath and circled the desk, looming the way he used to when I broke curfew as a teenager. Those files were classified. You could face federal charges just for possessing them. National security, I said dryly. That's your excuse for everything? His jaw tightened. It's not an excuse. It's protection, for you as much as me. Stop pretending this was noble. My voice rose, cracking on the edge of fury. You used intelligence to control people. You manipulated the courts, the system, everything Mom tried to believe in. He laughed softly, and the sound crawled under my skin. Your mother was naive. She thought integrity could survive in politics. She was wrong, and you're wrong if you think any of this will matter now. Maybe not to you, I said, but it mattered to her. He leaned in, close enough that I could smell the faint trace of his cologne, the same one he'd worn my entire life. You're playing with fire, Rita. If you push this, the people I answer to will make sure you regret it. I'm not afraid of you anymore, I said quietly, or them. He studied me for a moment longer, then straightened and forced a smile. You sound just like her, and look what it cost her. I picked up the photo and tucked it back into my bag. You're not the only one who can build alliances, Dad. Remember that. I left before he could answer, his reflection warping in the glass doors behind me like a ghost trapped inside his own empire. That evening, I sat in Clara's apartment while she connected her phone to a small recorder. My pulse still raced from the confrontation. "Say it again," she said. "He threatened me, said I was playing with fire and that his people would make sure I regretted it." "Good," she said, pressing stop on the recorder. "That's intimidation. Combined with the journal, we're beyond probate law now. We can build a complaint for judicial misconduct and, if necessary, federal corruption." I nodded, but my chest felt heavy. Renee warned me not to rush. She said timing would matter. "Renee's a ghost from the Air Force," Clara said. "She might have reasons to be cautious. But right now, the leverage is on our side. We need to use it before they bury the evidence." I looked down at my hands. They were shaking. "He said he was protecting me." "That's what people like him always say," Clara murmured. "It's never about protection. It's about control." Her cat jumped onto the couch, curling against my knee like it didn't notice my world unraveling. I reached for the glass of wine she'd poured and found my voice steadier than before. "If we go forward, it can't be just about Mom's estate anymore. We go after all of it. Every favor, every case, every ruling that smells wrong." Clara smiled faintly. "Now you sound like a lawyer again." When I drove home, the streets were nearly empty. A drizzle clung to the windshield, turning traffic lights into blurred jewels. I parked, climbed the stairs, and paused at my apartment door. Something felt off, the faint metallic smell of tampered air. Inside, nothing looked disturbed at first. Then I noticed the open drawer of my desk. Papers shifted. My laptop light blinked, though I'd shut it down earlier. I froze. Every muscle screamed to move quietly. The journal was still where I'd hidden it, inside the false back of a kitchen cabinet. I checked. Safe. But when I returned to the living room, my stomach turned. The window lock had been scratched. Faint metal shavings on the sill. Someone had tried to open it from the outside. I sat on the couch, forcing myself to breathe. The recorder in my pocket felt suddenly small, insufficient. I typed a quick text to Clara. "Someone's been inside my apartment. Nothing taken. Files untouched." But they were looking. Her reply came seconds later. "Pack essentials. Stay with me tonight." I stared at the chest in my mind's eye, the roses hiding more than I could see, and realized my mother must have lived with this same kind of fear every day. The difference was that she'd done it alone. Not anymore. I grabbed the journal, the flash drive Renee had given me, and the photo. As I stepped out into the hallway, the air smelled faintly of cigarette smoke, the same brand my father used to keep in his desk drawer, though he'd long since claimed to have quit. I turned the lock twice, checked the shadows, and walked toward the stairwell, repeating her words in my head like armor. "Don't be afraid of the truth." Tonight, truth had teeth, and I was finally ready to let it bite. Rain hit the city sideways the next morning. That relentless Seattle kind of rain that blurred buildings into ghosts. I sat at Clara's kitchen counter with a borrowed hoodie and a mug of black coffee that burned the back of my throat. Neither of us had spoken much since I showed up at midnight. She was typing furiously on her laptop, glasses slipping down her nose. "We can't call the police," she muttered. "Not yet. If the break-in ties back to your father, we'll lose the only chance to expose him cleanly. They'll spin it as family paranoia." "He doesn't need to get his hands dirty," I said. "He has people for that." Clara looked up. "Then we outsmart his people." She clicked open a file. "I've already compiled judicial records for the last 5 years. Out of 216 cases presided by Alcott, 31 involved your father's firm. 28 of those ended in your father's favor." "That's not bias," I said. "That's coordination." "Exactly." She sat back, rubbing her eyes. "We can't file a full ethics complaint yet. We'll need corroboration, a whistleblower, something inside the courthouse." The word whistleblower sparked a thought. Joyce, the quiet clerk who always avoided eye contact during hearings. She'd once slipped me an extra copy of a sealed docket without being asked. I'd thanked her. She hadn't said a word, just nodded with something like pity. I opened my phone and found her number buried in old messages. "Me, Joyce, this is Rita Wright. I need to talk to you. Privately." No response. I set the phone down, anxiety scratching at my ribs. 2 hours later, Clara left for a deposition, promising to come back before dark. I stayed behind, reading through my mother's journal again. Somewhere between the lines about signal chains and information leaks, a note in the margin caught my eye. If compromised, trust protocol. Lantern pattern. 2 sources, 1 truth. I didn't understand it, but it sounded like a code, her personal rule for verification. Maybe that's what she'd meant by winter lantern. 2 witnesses, 1 truth. Proof layered in pairs, so no single document could destroy or save her. The rain eased to a mist. I decided to drive back to my apartment to see the damage in daylight. The building was quiet. I walked through the hallway, keys ready like a weapon, though I had no plan if someone was inside. The door lock had been replaced. A note taped over it read, "Maintenance inspection, 10/24," except I hadn't requested any inspection. Inside, everything looked almost normal. Almost. The faint indentation of a shoe print on my rug, the scent of a stranger's cologne lingering too long. My laptop was gone from the desk. Not stolen, taken. Breathe, I told myself out loud, gripping the counter. This is confirmation, not defeat. Whoever broke in wanted information, not valuables, which meant they didn't find what they wanted, the journal, the drive, or the photo. My phone buzzed in my pocket, startling me. Unknown number again. I hesitated, then answered. "Ms. Wright," a male voice said, calm and professional. "You should drop the case. You're interfering with matters above your clearance." "Who is this?" "You're not in danger yet," he continued, ignoring me. "Stop digging, and your father can make all this disappear." My throat went dry. "Tell Leonard I don't take orders from him." A pause, then, "Who said this was Leonard?" The line went dead. I stood there, heartbeat pounding in my ears, the words echoing like static. Who said this was Leonard? By late afternoon, Clara was back, furious. "You should have called me the second that happened." "I'm calling now," I said, half laughing, half shaking. Better late than never. She paced the living room, phone to her ear, whispering to someone on the other end, likely Renee. After a few terse sentences, she hung up. "Renee thinks this isn't just your father," Clara said. She said the men tied to Blue Harbor had connections still active, legal, military, political. She warned that exposing them could trigger national security protections. If we move too fast, we'll be the ones accused of treason. "So what do we do?" Clara's eyes sharpened. "We outflank them legally. They can't intimidate what they can't predict." She opened a drawer, pulling out 2 flash drives. I copied everything we have so far. One stays with me, one goes to a safety deposit box under your mother's maiden name. If something happens to either of us, the files get released to the Judicial Ethics Board and the press simultaneously. The idea steadied me. Insurance. Exactly. Around dusk, my phone finally buzzed with a new message from Joyce. "Meet me in the records room tomorrow, 8 a.m. Early. Alone. No signature, but I knew her clipped style." My pulse quickened. Clara looked over my shoulder and nodded. "She's our whistleblower." Or bait. She wouldn't risk contact unless she'd seen something, or unless someone told her to lure me out. Clara's face softened. "You can't live like everyone's a suspect, Rita." "I can if they keep breaking into my home," I said quietly. That night, I couldn't sleep. My body was exhausted, but my mind refused to shut down. The rain had stopped, leaving the world hushed and heavy. I sat by Clara's window, journal open, the city's lights reflecting faintly in the glass. The last few pages of my mother's notes read almost like a goodbye. "If they ever come for you, remember, fear is their oldest weapon. Don't give it language." I thought about how she must have written that knowing she was dying, how she'd hidden evidence instead of burning it, how she'd trusted me, somehow, to finish what she started. The clock hit 2 a.m. when Clara's phone buzzed on the counter. She was asleep on the couch, laptop still open beside her. The caller ID flashed unknown. I answered before logic caught up. "Hello?" A familiar voice. "You shouldn't have shown her the photo." My stomach turned. "Dad." He sighed, almost weary. "This isn't the way, Rita. You're going to destroy more than you understand." "Mom understood," I shot back. "She documented everything because she knew you'd lie even after she was gone." "Your mother didn't understand what was at stake," he said, tone cooling. "You think this is about one judge and one firm. You have no idea how many people's careers, marriages, and lives were built on the foundation you're about to shatter. You expose this, and you won't be applauded. You'll be erased." "Is that a threat?" "It's a fact." He hesitated. "I'm still your father. Walk away while you can." "Maybe you should tell that to the people who broke into my apartment." Silence. Then, "You shouldn't have been there." My chest constricted. "You knew?" "I'm trying to protect you," he said. I laughed bitterly. "Funny, that's what Mom wrote right before she started hiding evidence from you." "Rita!" I hung up. My hands were shaking, but my voice when I spoke to the empty room was steady. Not this time. At 7:45 the next morning, I stood outside the courthouse. The air smelled like rain-soaked metal and coffee from the vendors across the street. Inside, fluorescent lights hummed as I made my way to the basement records room. Joyce was already there, her cardigan buttoned unevenly, hair slightly frizzed from the humidity. She didn't smile. "Thank you for coming," she whispered, glancing over her shoulder. "I don't have long." "What's going on?" She handed me a small envelope. "Minutes from a private meeting last week, not logged on the docket. Alcott and your father met in chambers without attorneys. It's illegal. He's been signing off on procedural delays that never went through the clerk's office." I opened the envelope, my breath catching as I read the brief notes. Initials, dates, sums. Payoffs disguised as consulting retainers. Joyce leaned closer. "Be careful. The judge's clerk. He's noticed me pulling records. I think he suspects." "Why risk this?" I asked softly. She looked at me then, eyes wet but resolute. "Because your mother helped me once, years ago. She got my brother a job when no one else would. When I heard your name, I knew who you were. She doesn't deserve what they're doing to her memory." Before I could answer, footsteps echoed down the hall. Joyce shoved the folder into my hands. "Go."
"Joyce."
"Go," she hissed, turning to a shelf and pretending to stack boxes. I slipped out a side door just as two men in suits walked in. One of them glanced briefly at me, his gaze sharp and assessing. I didn't look back. Outside, the morning light was thin but blinding. I tucked the folder under my coat and walked fast toward the street, pretending I wasn't shaking. When I finally reached Clara's car, parked half a block away, I locked the doors and let out a single breath that fogged the windshield. Inside my coat, the folder pressed against my ribs like a heartbeat. This wasn't just a family dispute anymore. It was a conspiracy decades deep, and I was standing at its center. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid. By the next morning, the world felt quieter, but only on the surface. Beneath that calm, I could sense the machinery of my father's influence turning. The folder Joyce had given me sat on Clara's desk, its contents now scanned, copies, and encrypted in 3 separate drives. "We have enough to trigger a judicial ethics investigation," Clara said, scrolling through the scanned pages. "Private meetings, undeclared payments, the whole web. But if we file this, they'll know exactly who exposed them." I watched the rain smear itself down her window. "They already know." Clara looked up. "Rita, they could bury you in litigation for years. Or worse. You've seen how far they'll go to protect themselves." "Then they should be scared too." She studied me a moment longer, then nodded. "All right. But first we secure physical copies. I'll have them notarized under witness seal. You don't carry them. I do." I wanted to argue, but exhaustion overrode pride. "Fine." The next few days blurred into quiet panic. Everywhere I went, I felt watched. The same silver sedan parked across from my building. The same man with a briefcase always a few tables away at the cafe. It was subtle, professional surveillance, the kind my mother used to describe when she still believed I was too young to understand. By Thursday, I hadn't heard from my father. Not a call, not a text. Silence. Weaponized, deliberate. Which is why, when Mark Delaney called on Friday morning, I already knew who had sent him. "Miss Wright," he began smoothly, "my client would like to resolve the matter privately. Could we schedule a meeting at noon?" "Where?" "Our downtown office. Your attorney's presence is welcome, of course." The phrasing was careful, too careful. Clara's eyebrows shot up when I told her. "A settlement meeting? Suddenly? They're panicking." "Or setting a trap," I said. "Either way, we go prepared." The conference room was designed to intimidate. Walls of glass, a panoramic view of the Sound, and a polished mahogany table big enough for 20. Delaney waited at one end. All smiles. A man paid to look unthreatening. Beside him sat 2 junior associates who looked like they hadn't slept. Clara and I took the opposite side. The air smelled faintly of leather and anxiety. Delaney began with pleasantries, thanking us for our patience through this complex situation. Then he slid a document folder across the table. "Mr. Wright has decided this legal conflict has gone on long enough. He's prepared to withdraw all objections to the estate. You would receive your full inheritance immediately." Clara's face didn't change, but I could feel her attention sharpen. "That's generous," she said lightly. "What's the condition?" Delaney smiled, practiced and empty. "A minor clause. Ms. Wright would relinquish possession of the antique oak chest and its contents, which Mr. Wright believes have sentimental value tied to his family lineage." My chest tightened. He never cared about sentiment. Delaney ignored the jab. "This would conclude all proceedings without further expense or publicity. Everyone wins." I leaned forward, except my mother. He met my gaze. Your mother's wishes will be fully honored, except for the chest. Mr. Wright feels strongly that it belongs with his side of the family. Clara flipped through the pages. And this second clause? Ah, he cleared his throat. A standard non-disclosure agreement. Given the sensitive nature of prior communications, both parties would agree not to discuss internal family matters publicly. Family matters? I repeated. You mean national security crimes? He blinked once, but didn't rise to the bait. You've misunderstood the scope. This is simply a protective measure to prevent reputational harm on both sides. And what's the reputation worth to him? I asked. He tapped the final page. $200,000. Cash settlement in addition to your inheritance. For a moment, all I could hear was the steady hum of the HVAC system. $200,000. More money than I'd ever seen in one place. The kind of sum that could erase my student debt, secure a future, give Emma a college fund, pay for a life my mother had only dreamed of for me. Clara stayed silent, watching my face. Delaney's tone softened, almost paternal. You're a public defender, correct? Underpaid, overworked. This would give you peace of mind. Freedom. Freedom. That word caught like a thorn. I pictured my mother hunched over her kitchen table, writing in her journal by lamplight, while chemo hollowed her out. I remembered the entry she'd written the year before she died. Integrity matters most when it costs something. I looked back at Delaney. I'm guessing this offer expires soon? End of business today, he said smoothly. Mr. Wright wants this resolved immediately. Of course he does, Clara murmured. He's racing the clock on the ethics complaint. I turned to her. If I sign this, we can't file it, right? Not legally, she said. The NDA binds you to silence. The evidence would become unusable in court. I closed the folder and slid it back. Then my answer's no. Delaney's calm cracked for the first time. Miss Wright, I don't think you understand the magnitude of what you're walking away from. Oh, I understand perfectly, I said. 200,000 to forget my mother existed, to pretend none of this happened. You can tell my father he can keep his money. I prefer the truth. His jaw flexed. You're making a mistake. Offers like this don't come twice. I stood. You're right about that. Next time it'll be my offer. Mom would have done the same. Back in Clara's car, I stared out at the drizzle, thickening into fog. Do you ever think about what happens if we lose? I asked. She turned the key, the dashboard lighting her face. All the time. Then I think about what happens if we don't try. My phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. Last chance to walk away, Rita. 6 p.m. tonight. After that, you're responsible for what follows. Clara leaned over. Who is it? Doesn't matter. I deleted the message. We're past warnings. That evening, the two of us sat surrounded by papers in Clara's apartment. Renee joined us through a video call from Virginia, her face grainy but resolute. They offered you money? She asked. $200,000, I said. Renee gave a humorless chuckle. That's cheap for silence. He's desperate. He knows the investigation clock is ticking. Alcott's connections are starting to fray. Then we file now, Clara said. Tonight. No, Renee said sharply. Not yet. Let them think you're still considering. They'll make a move, and when they do, we'll have proof of coercion. That strengthens your case. Clara frowned. So we just wait? Not long, Renee promised. They'll panic. They always do. When the call ended, Clara sat back, rubbing her temples. You sure about this? I looked down at the open journal in front of me, its last lines illuminated by the lamplight. If they offer peace, it's because they smell their own collapse. I'm sure, I said. They just confirmed everything Mom predicted. That night, as I left Clara's building, the city was slick with rain and reflections. A black SUV idled at the curb. Its headlights flared once, then dimmed. I slowed, heart pounding. A window rolled down, just enough for a familiar voice to reach me through the hiss of rain. Get in the car, Rita. My father's voice, controlled, tired, dangerous. I didn't move. You should have sent another lawyer. Mark's not persuasive enough, he said. You're making this harder than it has to be. I'm not the one hiding crimes. Crimes? He laughed softly. Your mother filled your head with fairy tales about justice. This is real life. People do what they must to survive. She didn't survive, Dad. His face hardened. Get in the car. We'll talk like family. No, I said, stepping back. Families don't threaten each other. For a second, I thought he'd get out. Instead, he gave a small, almost pitying shake of his head. You've chosen your side, then. I'm just standing on the right one. He looked at me the way a surgeon might look at a dying patient, regretful but detached. Then he rolled up the window, and the SUV pulled away into the rain. I stood there for a long time, soaked through, watching the taillights fade. Something inside me shifted. The last trace of wanting his approval broke free and fell away. By the time I got home, I'd already made up my mind. I pulled out my mother's journal, flipped to the final page, and wrote beneath her last line, "I won't sell your truth, Mom, not for any price." I placed the pen down, steady at last. Tomorrow, we'd stop waiting. Tomorrow, we'd start fighting. By dawn, the decision had hardened into something almost physical, like armor. The fog outside Clara's apartment was thick enough to erase the skyline, but inside we were wide awake, surrounded by piles of notes, legal drafts, and photocopied evidence. Clara sat cross-legged on the couch, her laptop balanced on a stack of law books. "All right," she said, rubbing her temples. "We're going to file 2 tracks simultaneously. 1, the formal ethics complaint against Judge Alcott. 2, a confidential brief to the Department of Justice outlining potential misuse of classified intelligence for personal gain." "Without exposing Blue Harbor itself?" I asked. She nodded. "We word it carefully, enough to spark investigation, not enough to trigger a national security shutdown." I exhaled slowly. "So, we walk a tightrope and hope nobody shakes the wire." "That's the job." The knock came just after 8. Renee stood in the doorway, trench coat soaked from rain, expression grim but steady. She looked like she hadn't slept, yet her eyes were sharp. "Clara filled me in," she said, pulling out a small folder. "This is Caleb Monroe's affidavit. He served with your mother at Blue Harbor. He's willing to confirm that Leonard and Alcott had access to classified surveillance feeds they weren't cleared to view." "Will he testify?" Clara asked. "If it comes to that. He's retired now, has nothing to lose." Renee hesitated, then looked at me. "He said your mother saved his career once. He owes her." I took the folder, feeling the weight of it. "Then we make sure his courage counts." By mid-morning, the apartment had transformed into a war room. We laid out timelines, financial records, cross-referenced case numbers from Alcott's docket, and drew connections with red string across Clara's corkboard. The result looked like a spider's web of deceit stretching back 20 years. Every line ended with the same 2 names, Leonard Wright and Richard Alcott. Clara stepped back, staring at the board. "This isn't just favoritism, it's a full-blown quid pro quo operation. Legal favors for political silence." "And my mother documented it all," I said quietly. She knew someday it would matter. Renee crossed her arms. "She also knew they'd retaliate when cornered. You need to be ready for that." "How?" "Protect your assets, cut digital trails, keep backups in at least 3 separate places. And Rita, don't be alone." Her tone left no room for argument. That afternoon, we met Caleb Monroe at a diner off I-5. He looked exactly how I imagined a retired military officer would. Upright, precise, polite to a fault. He ordered black coffee and spoke in clipped sentences. "Elena Foster," he said after introductions, "was one of the best analysts we had. She discovered that domestic surveillance feeds were being accessed without clearance. When she confronted legal counsel, they brushed her off." "Legal counsel being my father and Alcott," I said. He nodded. "Yes, she documented it, but before she could report officially, the project was shut down and reclassified. That's when she left the service." "Do you know what happened to the data?" Clara asked. "It vanished into private servers connected to corporate clients. They used it to manipulate contracts and political votes. I didn't realize how deep it went until years later." Renee leaned forward. "Would you swear to that under oath?" He met her gaze without hesitation. "I already have, in writing. If they want my testimony in court, they'll get it." When he handed me a sealed envelope, his hand lingered on mine. "Your mother was brave. You'll need to be, too." Back at Clara's, the 3 of us reviewed the affidavit. His statements corroborated every key detail in my mother's journal. Dates matched. Names matched. Even the language felt familiar, as if my mother had trained him to think like her. "This is it," Clara said, "the missing piece." But my chest tightened instead of relaxing. "Then why does it feel like we just painted a target on ourselves?" Because we had. That evening, as we packed evidence into labeled folders, a sudden knock rattled the apartment door. Clara froze mid-step. "Expecting anyone?" I shook my head. She peered through the peephole, then swore softly. "It's him. My father." Before I could react, she opened the door just enough for her voice to slip through. "Mr. Wright, you need to contact our office formally. This isn't appropriate." He pushed the door wider, ignoring her entirely, rain beating on his suit jacket. For the first time, he didn't look invincible. His tie was crooked, eyes rimmed red, skin ashen. "Rita," he said, "we need to talk." I stood my ground. We already did. You don't understand the forces you're provoking. His voice cracked on the word forces. You think Alcott will fall alone? He won't. He'll take everyone down with him, including me, including you. Then maybe that's what justice looks like, I said. He slammed his palm against the doorframe. Justice? You're calling this justice? You're dismantling lives, your own blood's included. Blood stopped mattering the day you made Mom beg for mercy in court. His expression twisted, pain, rage, regret, all colliding. She never told you everything, he said quietly. There are files she didn't destroy. If you keep digging, others will come for you. Not me, not Alcott. Others. Clara stepped forward, voice icy. Mr. Wright, this is harassment. Leave, or I'll call security. He turned on her, eyes full of something close to desperation. You think you're protecting her, but you're making her a target. I met his gaze one last time. Then stop aiming. He hesitated, then straightened, smoothing his jacket like rearming himself. You've chosen war, he said, voice steady again. So be it. When the door finally shut behind him, the silence was deafening. Renee exhaled first. That wasn't a warning. That was surrender disguised as threat. He's losing control. Clara nodded. He'll lash out next. I sank into a chair, adrenaline fading into exhaustion. Then we finish before he can. By midnight, the complaint was ready. 37 pages of documented evidence, sworn affidavits, and attached exhibits. Clara signed her attorney certification, slid it into an envelope, and pressed the seal. This goes to the Judicial Review Board first thing tomorrow, she said. Once it's filed, it's public record. They can't bury it quietly. Renee closed her laptop. I'll alert my contacts in D.C. The moment the complaint hits, Internal Affairs will open a shadow audit. That'll freeze both of them in place. I looked down at the sealed envelope. My hands trembled slightly as I took it. She'd be proud, I whispered. Clara smiled faintly. She'd be terrified for you. She'd still be proud, I said. We shared a quiet laugh that didn't quite reach our eyes. After they'd gone to bed, I found myself standing on Clara's balcony, watching the rain trace silver lines down the city's spine. The streets below glowed with reflections. Amber, blue, white. Somewhere out there, my father was probably watching me, wondering how his daughter became his enemy. I thought about my mother again, the way she'd smile when she was hiding pain, the quiet strength she'd pass off as calm. I finally understood her silence wasn't weakness. It was calculation. She'd been waiting for someone who could finish what she started. I looked at the sealed envelope on the table inside, the culmination of months of fear, grief, and defiance, and realized this was more than revenge. It was inheritance, the kind that couldn't be measured in dollars. Tomorrow, the system that had protected my father would face the truth. And if it burned, so be it. The morning of the hearing arrived gray and cold, the kind of day that carried the weight of unfinished business. My stomach churned, but beneath the nerves there was something steadier, resolve, clean and cold as winter air. Clara picked me up at dawn. She wore her power suit and the faintest trace of lipstick, a signal she was ready for war. I carried only one thing, my mother's journal, tucked inside my briefcase like a heartbeat. Renee and Caleb met us outside the courthouse. He looked composed, military posture intact, but his eyes flicked constantly to every corner, every passerby. They'll have observers, he said under his breath. Friends of Alcott, maybe federal reps pretending to be court aides. Keep calm, stick to verifiable facts. Clara nodded. And remember, we don't expose classified details unless forced. The ethics complaint stands on conflicts of interest, not espionage. I managed a smile that didn't quite hold. Got it. Be calm. Be boring. Renee squeezed my arm. Be exact. Inside, the courtroom buzzed with low conversation. Lawyers huddled in tight knots, papers rustling like restless wings. My father wasn't there yet, but Delaney was. Confident, smiling too easily. He caught my eye and offered a polite nod, the kind that said, "You've already lost." When the bailiff called for order, Judge Mara Sandoval entered. She was sharp-eyed, silver-haired, and rumored to have once resigned from a firm rather than cover up misconduct. She looked like someone who'd heard every kind of lie and still believed in truth's endurance. She shuffled through papers. We have several motions before the court today, she said, including a late-filed request to seal proceedings on national security grounds. Her gaze lifted. Counsel for the respondent? Delaney stood. Yes, Your Honor. The matters alleged in Ms. Wright's recusal motion involve classified operations and must be protected from public exposure. Clara rose smoothly. Respectfully, Your Honor, our motion does not reference classified content. It concerns judicial ethics, private communications, undisclosed financial relationships, and procedural bias in probate rulings. Sandoval regarded her over the rim of her glasses. Mr. Delaney, do you have evidence that this case implicates classified information? Delaney hesitated. We believe. Belief is not evidence, the judge interrupted. Motion to seal is denied. Proceed. A ripple of whispers swept the gallery. Delaney sat, jaw tight. Clara glanced at me once, subtle triumph in her eyes. Then the door at the back of the courtroom opened, and my father entered. The sight of him hit harder than I expected. Not the man who towered over childhood arguments, but someone diminished. His hair was thinner, skin grayer, yet the arrogance survived, polished and unbroken. He took his seat beside Delaney without looking at me. Miss Ruiz, Judge Sandoval said, you may begin. Clara stepped forward. Your Honor, this motion arises from serious ethical violations that compromise the integrity of these proceedings. Specifically, we have evidence of ex parte communications between Judge Richard Alcott and Leonard Wright, principal party to this case, occurring outside proper judicial channels. Additionally, Judge Alcott has received personal financial benefit from Mr. Wright's firm. She placed a folder on the bench, pages clipped and labeled. Bank records, correspondence, and witness statements confirm ongoing transactions between Mr. Wright's firm and a private consultancy registered to Judge Alcott under a secondary entity. The judge's eyebrows lifted slightly. Consultancy? Yes, Your Honor. It handled tax matters and legal advisory services while the judge presided over cases involving that same firm. Murmurs rippled through the gallery again. Delaney rose instantly. Your Honor, these are speculative accusations drawn from misinterpreted records. Clara didn't flinch. Then let the court interpret them. Sandoval examined the documents, flipping each page with deliberate slowness. The silence stretched until I could hear my own pulse. When she finally looked up, her expression had changed, measured but grim. These are serious allegations. Mr. Wright, do you wish to respond? My father stood, smoothing his jacket. Your Honor, this entire crusade stems from personal grievance. My daughter is grieving her mother's death and has been misled by outside parties with their own agendas. Any financial transactions with Judge Alcott were above-board professional consultations predating this case. Professional, Clara said sharply. That conveniently coincided with favorable rulings in every relevant matter. The judge raised a hand. Enough. Mr. Delaney, summon Judge Alcott. The court would like to hear from him directly. A low buzz spread through the room. The clerk left to fetch him. My father turned halfway toward me, eyes narrow, lips moving just enough for me to read the words. Stop this. I didn't blink. The minutes crawled. Then the door opened again, and Judge Alcott entered. Gone was his robe of authority. He looked smaller, his confidence dampened by exposure. He sat beside the bench, face pale, hands trembling slightly. Judge Sandoval addressed him. Judge Alcott, before we proceed, do you wish to address the allegations of undisclosed financial relationships with counsel appearing before your court? Alcott cleared his throat. I've done nothing inappropriate. Clara rose. Your Honor, with the court's permission, Ms. Wright would like to make a brief statement. Sandoval nodded. Proceed. I stood, palms slick against the wood of the table. Your Honor, my mother's estate case has been delayed 5 times. Each delay benefited the same man who once stripped her of everything during their divorce, my father. I believed it was personal, but it's bigger than that. These aren't coincidences, they're patterns. Delaney shot up. Objection! Irrelevant emotional testimony. Overruled, Sandoval said without hesitation. I looked directly at Alcott. You told us you needed more time to review medical records, but you weren't reviewing anything. You were buying time for my father to cover tracks that started long before this case, back when you both worked under a project called Blue Harbor. The words hung there, cold and heavy. A stillness rippled through the room, the kind that comes right before thunder. Alcott's face drained of color. My father stiffened. What did you say? Sandoval asked, voice low but sharp. I drew a breath. Winter lantern, I said softly. The phrase sliced through the silence like a knife. Across the aisle, my father half rose from his chair, panic flashing across his features before he could mask it. Alcott gripped the table's edge so hard his knuckles whitened. Major Caleb Monroe stood in the gallery. Your Honor, he said, stepping forward, voice steady. I am Major Caleb Monroe, retired United States Air Force. I served with Elena Foster, Ms. Wright's mother, during the Blue Harbor operation. I can verify the authenticity of her records and the misconduct she documented. Every head turned. The bailiff hesitated, unsure whether to stop him, but Sandoval gestured for him to continue. My sworn affidavit confirms that legal officers Leonard Wright and Richard Alcott accessed classified surveillance for personal and political gain, Monroe said. They used that information to manipulate outcomes, both legal and financial. The gallery erupted. Murmurs, gasps, someone audibly whispering, "My God." Sandoval banged her gavel once. Order! Alcott's voice broke. Your Honor, this is outrageous. These people have no clearance. Sit down, Judge, Sandoval said evenly. You will remain silent until I say otherwise. My father's composure fractured completely. This is an ambush, he said, voice rising. These are fabricated documents from a bitter woman and her unstable daughter. Enough! Sandoval's gavel cracked through his words. The court will review these records independently, but for now, I find sufficient basis to grant the motion for recusal. Judge Alcott, you are hereby removed from all matters relating to this case, effective immediately. The courtroom went still. Even Delaney's pen stopped moving. Then, in a softer tone, the judge added, Furthermore, the court will refer these allegations to the Judicial Ethics Committee for investigation. It was over, not the war, but the first battle that mattered. As the room emptied, I gathered my things. My father approached, face tight, voice a rasp. You think this is victory? You've humiliated us publicly. No, I said quietly. You did that yourself. Drop the case, he said. Issue a statement clearing Alcott, and maybe this ends quietly. I looked at him, at the man who had once lifted me onto his shoulders at a Mariners game, who taught me to drive, who then used every lesson of power he ever learned to break my mother. No, Dad, I said. This ends when the truth does. For the first time in my life, he stepped back. Outside, cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions. Clara steered me toward the car, shielding me from the chaos. Renee followed, her phone already buzzing with messages from contacts in D.C. In the back seat, the adrenaline finally drained out of me. It's really happening, I whispered. Clara smiled tiredly. The system blinked today. That's more than most people ever manage. I stared out at the courthouse receding behind us. Through the glass, it looked small, just another building, but for the first time in years, I felt taller than its walls. Somewhere deep inside, I imagined my mother watching, calm and proud, whispering the words she wrote long ago. Fear is their oldest weapon. Don't give it language. I wouldn't, not ever again. Tomorrow would bring investigations, interviews, more hearings, and maybe danger. But tonight, for the first time since she died, I could breathe. The truth had spoken, and the world had finally heard it. 2 days after the hearing, Seattle's skyline felt different, clearer, as though the fog that had clung to everything for months had finally begun to lift. The air still carried tension, but it was no longer mine alone. The city, the press, even the judiciary could feel something shifting. The story had broken before sunrise. A quiet legal blog published a summary of the recusal order. By noon, 3 larger outlets picked it up. The headline hit like a thunderclap. Judge Alcott steps down amid conflict of interest allegations. Wright and Delaney firm named. Clara called at 6:30 a.m. We've started a landslide, she said, voice still thick with sleep. Internal review boards are mobilizing. Federal ethics officers reached out to confirm the authenticity of Monroe's affidavit. They're not ignoring it this time. My phone buzzed again, messages pouring in faster than I could read. Reporters, attorneys, strangers. Some sent congratulations, others warnings. I ignored them all. When I arrived at Clara's office, the conference table was covered with printouts, highlighted transcripts, and 2 cups of untouched coffee. She looked up with a wry smile. You've officially made enemies in powerful places? Then we're finally doing something right. By late afternoon, a courier delivered a letter on Wright and Delaney's embossed stationery. Clara slit the envelope carefully, scanning the text before sliding it to me. Notice of voluntary dismissal, estate of Elena Foster, filed by respondent Leonard Wright through counsel Mark Delaney. It was over. I read it twice to be sure, my eyes tracing every word like I expected them to vanish. They're withdrawing, I whispered. Clara nodded slowly. They're cutting their losses. Public exposure is more dangerous than losing the estate. I sank into the nearest chair, the paper trembling in my hands. 8 months, I said softly. 8 months of delays, threats, and manipulation, and all it took was 4 words. Clara smiled faintly. Winter lantern, she repeated, shaking her head. Your mother really did know how to pick her codes. That afternoon, we returned to court for the final confirmation hearing before Judge Sandoval. The gallery was quieter this time, but the tension was palpable. Judge Sandoval reviewed the file for several long minutes before speaking. After careful review of the will and medical documents, she said, the court finds that Elena Foster was of sound mind and free of undue influence when executing her testamentary documents. Her estate shall be distributed according to her wishes. The gavel fell. It was a simple motion, a few seconds of sound, but it echoed through me like a lifetime's release. Clara touched my shoulder. It's done, Rita. It's really done. I felt tears sting my eyes, but they weren't the bitter kind. They were the kind that come when you finally lay down a burden you forgot how to live without. Outside the courthouse, the sky had cleared completely. Reporters waited by the steps, microphones flashing like weapons, but I gave them nothing, just a calm smile and one sentence. My mother's truth speaks for itself. Renee stood a few paces away, talking quietly to Caleb. When I reached them, she handed me a folded sheet of paper. From the DOJ liaison, she said, they've opened a preliminary inquiry into Alcott's past rulings and the Blue Harbor operation. You might not hear updates for a while, but make no mistake, this has started something. Caleb nodded solemnly. They'll investigate quietly, but thoroughly. The rot goes deep. Elena knew it. Now they can't hide it anymore. I stared at the courthouse doors one last time. Then her fight wasn't in vain. No, Renee said. She made sure of that. Later that evening, I drove to Tacoma. The small townhouse my mother had left me looked almost exactly as I remembered it, the porch light flickering, the wind chimes tinkling softly. Inside, the scent of cedar lingered from her old candles. The oak chest sat in the living room, polished and still. For months, it had been a symbol of everything I was fighting for. Now it was simply hers, and finally, mine. I knelt beside it, tracing the carvings along its edge. The brass latch clicked open with a sound I'd memorized in childhood. Inside lay her journals, her medals, her carefully folded Air Force uniform, and a bundle of letters tied with twine. On top, an envelope addressed in her handwriting, For Rita, when it's over. My heart stuttered. I unfolded the letter carefully. My brave girl, if you're reading this, then you found the courage I prayed you'd never have to use. You've seen how truth costs everything, but also how it sets you free. Don't let bitterness take root where justice once lived. Remember that integrity without compassion becomes cruelty, and victory without peace is just another kind of loss. You were always my light in the dark. Winter lantern indeed. Mom. The ink had faded in places, but her words were steady, every letter written with love and restraint. I pressed the letter to my chest, closing my eyes as the last of my anger finally drained away. I did it, Mom, I whispered. We did it. 2 weeks later, Clara dropped by with coffee and good news. Alcott's resignation just hit the judicial bulletin, she said. He cited health reasons, but internal review is ongoing. Leonard's firm has launched an internal ethics audit. It's all unraveling. I smiled, though part of me still felt heavy. He'll never face prison, will he? Probably not, Clara admitted, but his power's gone. Sometimes that's the bigger punishment. We sat in silence for a while, sipping coffee, letting the quiet fill in where tension used to live. What will you do now? She asked finally. Go back to work, I said, surprising myself with how right it felt. Help people who can't fight for themselves. Maybe set up a fund for ethical defense in court cases, something in Mom's name. Clara's smile widened. She'd love that. Months passed, and life began to look almost ordinary again. I returned to my job as a public defender, but everything had changed. I stood taller now, spoke louder, challenged injustice without hesitation. The experience had burned away fear, leaving something cleaner, conviction. When younger attorneys asked how I'd managed to go up against a judge and win, I told them the truth. You don't win by being fearless. You win by being prepared. One afternoon, a new client, a single mother, wrongfully evicted, asked if I'd ever been scared of losing. I smiled. Every day, I said, but fear only matters if it stops you. 6 months later, I visited the cemetery. The wind carried the scent of rain and pine, the same as the morning we'd buried her. I laid fresh lilies on her grave, smoothing the petals against the granite. "Your story's safe now," I said softly, "but it's not finished. I'm going to use what you left me, the chest, the journals, to build something better. Maybe a scholarship, maybe a foundation, something that helps others stand up the way you taught me to." A gust of wind rustled through the oak trees overhead. For a moment, it felt like she was there, quiet, proud, at peace. I turned to leave, the sky streaked with gold from the setting sun. As I walked back to my car, I caught my reflection in the window. Not the woman who had trembled in a courtroom months ago, but someone steadier. Not a survivor, not even a victor. A witness, because that's what Mom had always been. A witness to truth when silence was safer, and now that legacy belonged to me. A week later, the first article about the Elena Foster Integrity Fund went live. It was small, just a local story, but it ended with a quote I'd written for the press release. "Justice isn't about destroying people. It's about preventing the next person from being destroyed." The line went viral overnight. Renee called the next morning. "You just started a movement," she said. Elena would be proud. I looked out the window at the city waking up, sunlight breaking through overcast skies. "She already is," I whispered. For the first time since all of this began, I felt peace. Not because everything was fixed, but because everything that mattered finally stood in the open. The truth had survived, and so had I.